Hello, friends, and welcome to the Diabetes Pro Tip series from the Juicebox Podcast. These episodes have been remastered for better sound quality by Rob at Wrong Way Recording. When you need it done right, you choose Wrong Way. WrongWayRecording.com. Initially imagined by me as a 10-part series, the Diabetes Pro Tip series has grown to 26 episodes. These episodes now exist in your audio player between episode 1000 and episode 1025. They are also available online at diabetesprotip.com and juiceboxpodcast.com. This series features myself and Jennifer Smith. Jenny is a CDE and a type 1 for over 35 years. This series was my attempt to bring together the management ideas found within the podcast in a way that would make it digestible and revisitable. It has been so incredibly popular that these 26 episodes are responsible for well over 500,000 downloads within the Juicebox Podcast. While you're listening, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Ascensia Diabetes, makers of the Contour Next Gen blood glucose meter. And they have an amazing offer for you. Right now, at my link only, contournext.com/juicebox free meter, you can get an absolutely free Contour Next Gen starter kit. That's contournext.com/juicebox free meter. While supplies last, U.S. residents only. The Remastered Diabetes Pro Tip series from the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Touched by Type 1. See all of the good work they're doing for people living with type 1 diabetes at touchedbytype1.org and on their Instagram and Facebook pages. This show is sponsored today by the glucagon that my daughter carries, Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Okay, so we're recording. I want to tell you that this lovely woman named Isabel has been helping me with the Facebook page. And she came to me recently and said, you need a pro tip for female hormones and you need a pro tip for the end of a honeymoon. She said these are things that people ask about constantly and they must not feel like they're getting what they need out of the podcast on this. Now, Jenny, you know, in my heart, the end of the honeymoon just means use more insulin. And when you get your period, it means use more insulin. But darn it, let's dig into it. Let's just dig into it and find out the details, okay? As a
Sure. Yes, they're both good topics. Yeah.
The details are apparently what is needed, and I am happy to deliver what is needed. And by that I mean dig it out of your head and record it so people can hear it.
Sure.
Okay, because my only experience with honeymooning, my only experience that I'm aware of personally with honeymooning, because Arden had diabetes, was diagnosed so long ago, and we had a little meter and some needles. I mean, I didn't really know what was happening in her. So The one thing that I can tell you is that I called my friend who was my children's pediatrician one day, and I've told you this before, but it fits in this episode, so let's put it here. And I told him, I prefaced my conversation by saying, I know what I'm about to say is ridiculous, but is there any chance Arden doesn't have diabetes? And he said, and he sounded sad. I think sad that I asked him, and he said, why? And I said, well, she hasn't needed insulin for about a day and a half now.
Right.
And that lasted maybe, I don't know, 72 hours. And then it was just gone. Anyway, that's my entire personal experience with honeymooning, but I know how difficult it can be for everybody. So.
Well, another good question in that, I mean, as you sort of began with, I just give more insulin, right? Well, a good piece of honeymoon is, or coming out of honeymoon, right? When you've kind of moved through that lack of insulin need, or really, some people can get by on just basal insulin. They might not need anything for their meals, or their blood sugars don't go high enough to correct or anything, right? But did you notice also that after that, like 3-ish days that her insulin needs were higher than they were before that.
Here's the honest answer. I don't know. I didn't know anything.
Right. You don't remember.
No, forget that I don't remember. I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
So like, I think that feeling maybe encapsulates more honeymooning and the leaving of honeymooning for people more than anything. Like, right. So somebody, you or your child gets type 1, it's a whirlwind. It's, and if you're honeymooning, insulin needs are changing kind of radically sometimes. So just when you maybe get the nerve to, I don't know, bolus 2 units of a basal, and then the next day you fight a 60 blood sugar all day that won't go up. And then the next day you think, well, maybe I shouldn't use the 2 units of basal. And then you don't. And then your body doesn't help that day. And your blood sugar is 300 all day. That uncertainty, I think, is the main characteristic of honeymooning. Don't you?
True. And honeymoon is really different person to person, as well as the movement out of honeymooning is different person to person. Like Arden didn't have a very long honeymoon at all. And that's not uncommon from the studies that have been done. It's not uncommon with kids under the age of 5 who are diagnosed to have a much more rapid onset of type 1, very quick, very aggressive, really high blood sugars, unless they've been watching for it or they know because of previous antibody testing that it could be coming, DKA, all of those kinds of things. And what that results in is causing enough of the betas to be stressed enough and the body kind of decreasing them enough in amount that now diabetes presents itself. Okay. So, but in older kids and especially in adults, there is often a slower progression of type 1, here it is, and all those symptoms. And that often leaves more betas in the picture. Also, what's been found is that the sooner you get containment of blood sugars after diagnosis, you give some relief to those beta cells. And because now, you're either injecting or you're pumping insulin. And so that's something that's helping to take care of the blood sugar levels, and your betas that do remain can actually help out. And so honeymoon then often comes in, where usually somewhere between about 1 to 4 months post-diagnosis is the typical honeymoon time to expect that to come into the picture. And how long it can last, again, is person to person. Yeah. It could be a couple months, it could be 3 days, it could be a year or two that you continue to have this lack of more typical insulin need.
Consistency. It's the consistency that you're missing, and that breaks people's hearts, I think. I'll tell you, after interviewing so many people, I've heard, I believe, every variation of time and distance about honeymooning from adults and children, and crazy stories where blood sugars are suddenly super normal, super out of whack. One lady, I'll never forget, told me she thinks her honeymoon lasted years. And then I'm wondering, is that honeymoon, or is it a slow onset? Is that and I guess it doesn't really matter, right? What matters is that you're using insulin now, and there's going to be this variability to how much until things, I guess you could just say settle, but obviously it's not settle. It's until your beta cells give up, right, completely. Do some people just not see a honeymoon at all? Or does it happen and they're not aware of it?
In talking with so many people that I have, and it's always something I ask about is diagnosis if somebody wants to talk about it, or if it's been very, very soon after I get to talk, or, before I get to talk to them, it's been very close to that time period. And it seems like, again, everybody is a little bit different. Little people, very little people tend to be the ones that I hear the most. We didn't notice very much honeymoon. Okay. Or, parents are concerned because they're like, I don't know. I feel like we never had a honeymoon. I feel like we never needed just a little bit of insulin. Right. We just went from not using any to really using insulin,
So functionally, how do people deal with it? So when, let's say I came to you and I said, hey, here's my 7-year-old kid. Yesterday, this basal and this meal ratio worked perfectly. Today, it's a hot mess and I'm saving low blood sugars all over the place. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but as I look back, this is bouncing around. It's 2 days of this, 1 day of that. But how do you find reasonable stability until things get normalized?
Well, some of it, again, in that early time period it's a bit of estimation. You can base it on, well, yesterday was a really sensitive day. If it looks like we fought low blood sugars all night and we're entering morning time again today with lower blood sugars yet again, that's a good visual that maybe today needs to be covered similar to yesterday or even less aggressively than yesterday, right? So some hindsight can help, but then, tomorrow morning you wake up high. If you didn't do anything strange overnight and you're all of a sudden high, today might be one of those days that you're going to need more insulin. Right. And so it's hard because it takes out of the picture a lot of the things that we've discussed in other episodes, like testing, right? I mean, doing things like basal testing in this time period, it's kind of hard because you don't really know exactly day to day how things are going to move. Overall, the general idea that kids before puberty, once remission has kind of gone away, right? Once that honeymoon period, you're expecting it's over, insulin needs usually are about 0.7 to 1 unit per kilogram per day of insulin.
Say it again.
0.7 to 1 unit per kilogram per day of insulin. Okay. So, and if you don't know pound to kilogram conversion, just take your pound weight and divide it by 2.2. Okay. And you'll have your weight in kilograms. But it's a baseline. If you were really, really, really low to begin with, and now you're doing a really low carb diet as well, you may not really see that insulin dosing kind of go along with what we would expect in terms of overall insulin need, right? Usually people are considered in remission if they're at, 0.5 or less, 0.5 units per kilogram per day or less of insulin. And then, once you get to puberty, gosh, I mean, you could use anywhere between a unit to 2 units of insulin a day during puberty. And that's completely normal. Right. Absolutely and completely normal. So if you're not so sensitive anymore, you definitely see these swings in blood sugar, especially in that growth period overnight or in the aftermath of meals, and it's lasting and lasting and lasting, guarantee you're probably not in honeymoon anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've said it to you, I've said it to everybody listening. You have to meet the need. And I don't know if I'm clear enough about that, but if one day the need is greater, then meet the greater need. And if one day the need is lesser, then meet the lesser need. And flexibility is it's completely key. It's what you're saying. It's like you have to sort of, I don't think that during honeymoon, you want to look real macro, not all the time, right? You want to kind of just deal with diabetes in segments of half days or hours or something like that. Like, here's what's happening right now. If it starts trending one way, then adjust with it. If it starts trending the other way, then adjust with it. But I don't think there's a lot of value unless you're matching an apples to apples day and going, well, last Thursday, she was really low, so I don't want to be aggressive 6 days later. You know what I mean? Like, today's got nothing to do.
There's no
correlation between now and 6 days ago when you're in this honeymoon fluctuation. And I know that people are going to think I'm flippant, but I think you could just retitle this episode Diabetes Pro Tip Menstruation. And I don't know that we're going to say too many different things when we get to it, which is why maybe for some people, they gloss over it when we talk about these basic ideas of like, it's not always going to be the same all the time. You can't always ask for a cut and dry answer. I mean, if you want to get through a honeymoon period and it's particularly, rocky, I think that just staying flexible, meeting the need, taking a little bit of historical knowledge off of days that were similar to the one you're experiencing now, I think that's really the whole thing.
I think that's the best that you can do oftentimes, especially in honeymoon. And then even, coming out of honeymoon, I know some people use the word like it becomes more stable. Okay. Sure. I mean, more stable in the fact that you're not like giving only one unit and that takes care of your whole day. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. But
or that one day the unit's necessary and then the next day it's not necessary, but there's consistency. Right. I think they mean
there's more consistency. Yeah. Is it exactly? And I mean, in honeymoon, again, there are ups, there are downs. Yes, you can choose to use insulin from some hindsight. From, again, I know on a really, really busy day like this, my child needs a lot less insulin, but is running high today.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, it's then meet the need in terms of where the blood sugar is right now. And thankfully these days, you didn't have, and I certainly didn't as a kid, have any visible to where my blood sugar was going at all. It was a one number. It could be rising in 10 minutes. It could be dropping in 10 minutes. Yeah. And that's what it was.
I wonder sometimes when I'm speaking to this person now who's got a very small child who I think still their needs are, they're not honeymooning. They had too much basal going. So it's, by using too much basal, they were getting drops that didn't seem to make sense, right? And so it took a day or two to figure out that the basal was too high to bring it down a little bit. But in there, while we were trying to figure it out, this person was using pens, and so they were relegated to 0.5 units at a time. And I just said, do you have syringes? And she did. So I was like, just eyeball less than a half next time we go for this meal. And did that and fixed a lot of their problems. And so while this kind of unseen force, obviously I'm talking about basal that we needed to fix still, but, let the unseen force be, your pancreas working all of a sudden was dropping her down. The limiting factor was the measurement on the pen. And then for some reason, your brain doesn't jump over that and go, well, this might be too much. What your brain says is, this is all I'm able to do. Do you know what I mean? But the minute we dropped down to these quarter of units, then suddenly there was far fewer spikes in the meals and then far fewer lows afterwards. And I'm just wondering, during the honeymoon period, if you are that scared of these crazy drops, do you maybe just draw back your basal a little bit, and then on days when that basal's not enough, just increase your meal insulin a little? Or do you know what I mean? Because also these poor people are probably MDI in this moment. The Remastered Diabetes Pro Tip series is sponsored by Ascensia Diabetes, makers of the Contour Next Gen blood glucose meter. And they have a unique offer just for listeners of the Juicebox Podcast. If you're new to Contour, you can get a free Contour Next Gen starter kit by visiting this special link, contournext.com/juicebox free meter. When you use my link, you're going to get the same accurate meter that my daughter carries. contournext.com/juicebox free meter. Head there right now and get yourself the starter kit. This free kit includes the Contour Next Gen meter, 10 test strips, 10 lancets, a lancing device, control solution, and a carry case. But most importantly, it includes an incredibly accurate and easy to use blood glucose meter. This Contour meter has a bright light for nighttime viewing, an easy to read screen. It fits well in your hand and features second chance sampling, which can help you to avoid wasting strips. Every one of you has a blood glucose meter. You deserve an accurate one. contournext.com/juicebox free meter to get your absolutely free Contour Next Gen starter kit sent right to your door. When it's time to get more strips, you can use my link and save time and money buying your Contour Next products from the convenience of your home. It's completely possible that you will pay less out of pocket in cash for your Contour strips than you're paying now through your insurance. contournext.com/juicebox juicebox free meter. Go get yourself a free starter kit. While supplies last, U.S. residents only. Touched by Type 1 has a wide array of resources and programs for people living with Type 1 diabetes. When you visit touchedbytype1.org, go up to the top of the page where it says Programs. There you're going to see all of the terrific things that Touched by Type 1 is doing. And I mean, it's a lot. Type 1 at school, the D-Box program, Golfing for Diabetes, Dancing for Diabetes, which is a terrific program. You just click on that to check that out. Bowl for a Cause, their awareness campaigns, and the annual conference that I've spoken at a number of years in a row. It's just amazing, just like Touched by Type 1. Touchedbytype1.org, or find them on Facebook and Instagram. Links in the show notes. Links at juiceboxpodcast.com to Touched by Type 1 and the other great sponsors that are supporting the remastering of the Diabetes Pro Tip series. Touchedbytype1.org. When you have diabetes and use insulin, low blood sugar can happen when you don't expect it. Gvoke HypoPen is a ready-to-use glucagon option that can treat very low blood sugar in adults and kids with diabetes ages 2 and above. Find out more. Go to gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Gvoke shouldn't be used in patients with pheochromocytoma or insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk.
Correct.
Yeah.
Most often, and like you said, unless they have, half unit dosed or marked syringes, in which, yes, if you got good eyes or you have a good magnifying glass, you can get kind of a quarter unit-ish in
drops
there, whatever it might be. I've got a good friend that does just that, and she's done it for a long time and it works great for her. But again, you have to kind of use those microscopic doses, and on pens, it's a hard thing to definitely do because all you can get is a half a unit. Right. I think on pumps, honestly, in Honeymoon, and I know a lot of clinics often don't encourage people to start pumping until Honeymoon is expected to be almost over. And sometimes I agree with that. Sometimes I don't agree with that. I think it kind of is individual in need. You have to look at what people are able to do and kind of a knowledge base of where are you already. But those doses, they do shift and change through Honeymoon. And then, going out of Honeymoon, you can expect the doses to definitely increase. Your child, your teen, your, adult that you're living with or you're a partner to or whatever, you're going to expect that their doses are going to increase. And while kids are growing at the same time as coming out of Honeymoon, there are a lot of factors there. Another piece in the mix that often shifts things to higher insulin, and we've talked about it before when we talked about illness and management, is that if a child is also sick within honeymooning and is now requiring more insulin, then by the end of the illness, they may actually either leave Honeymoon sooner, or they may just be still at a higher insulin need, as during the illness, the pancreatic beta cells were trying to assist, and there aren't very many of them left. So they were getting stressed out and can leave less than.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
that's interesting. I think that the next step here, besides telling people look, it's going to happen, if it's happening, flexibility is key. It's going to be a little more stressful, but only if you're looking macro when you should be looking micro, and then vice versa. Like you just talked about a number of ideas where you do want to pull back and see the big picture, but not about the fluctuations day to day. Those you kind of got to get on like a bull and ride them. You can't step back and have an existential conversation about whether or not you should be bull riding, so, but the other stuff, are there illnesses? Is there growth? Activity, those are big picture items. But so now you've figured out a way to ride through this honeymoon. The thing that I see from people over and over again is that when it ends, when the honeymoon's over, they can't believe it. They can't pull the trigger. They can't ramp up. think about it any way you want to, but they get stuck in the game and don't recognize that the game changed.
Yeah, I think the big thing there is that, especially in Honeymoon, the sensitivity to insulin makes people very wary of using more, right? Because you can get burned, right? By using more, thinking you needed more because yesterday it clearly didn't work with this, lunch that we provided. And we're giving the same lunch today. So I'm going to be more aggressive, gave a quarter unit yesterday. Today, I'm definitely giving a half a unit. And then on the back end, the drop happens, right? The good thing to know is that in, the coming out of Honeymoon, kind of moving out of that phase, is that you will have, again, more consistency in more need for insulin. You won't have as much potential for those drops where you learned they typically happened. Even if it wasn't every day, you probably got a good idea of where things needed to be lower in dose, or, that won't necessarily be the case once you're out of Honeymoon.
I feel like when I tell people about it, I say you just kind of have to reset at that moment. That's when you go back to the setting basal insulin pro tip. You start over again. You get the basal straight. You reevaluate how long your pre-bolus time is. You reevaluate your meal insulin after you've reevaluated your basal insulin. And you just kind of start over. The truth is that I think that the transition from Honeymoon to out of Honeymoon is not actually much different sometimes than the transition from MDI to pumping, in that it's just it's the same game, different players. Like, I don't know how to think of it. It's like, right church, wrong pew. I don't know what the thing is. Like, you're doing the same thing, but the pieces have all just sort of adjusted a little bit. And you have to just step back, take what you know about the thing you've been doing, and reapply it to the new situation, right?
Correct. And with pumping, that you've got a lot more precision that comes along with that. So if you've been doing things as precisely as possible with, let's say, just half units, right? And a basal that's given once or maybe twice a day, now you can really address where insulin needs are heavier and are lighter through the course of a 24-hour day. You can meet the need more precisely, thus the benefit of doing some basal testing again. Even if you're just doing it overnight. I mean, everybody wants to sleep. So if there's one time a day that you're going to do it overnight.
Definitely get that part done. And you
get that part done.
And you feel a bunch of A1C and some just good feelings in general. If you're thinking all 24 hours are just a train wreck, like maybe you could at least get 8 or 9 of them straight, and it's a good jumping in point for figuring out the rest of the day. I think that when you were saying something a minute ago, this thought just jumped into my head, and I'm going to put it here, and I think it fits. I think no matter the situation, maybe I'm talking about just diabetes or life in general, but do something is often the answer. People freeze wondering what the something should be. But if you're watching the same thing happen over and over and over again, if you just change the variables, the stressors on the situation, you might see something new that helps you understand a bigger picture or something different. And so, if blood sugars are, I don't think it's a joke, but like online sometimes somebody will throw up a graph and be like, I don't know what's wrong with this. And I'll literally just type more insulin. Because put in some more and watch what happens, and then go, oh, cause and effect. I've done this.
But they want to know where, right?
Yeah, okay.
They want not just more. They're like, but where should I put that more insulin?
Do something, though. Like, do something. Right? Like, if you haven't been on vacation in 15 years, take $5 a week and put it in an envelope. Do something. Right. Try to change the situation a little bit. And I get that it's frightening. And I used to think, Jenny, that all these things that I saw around diabetes were so specific to diabetes, but I've been having some personal things going on with my mom's health recently, which Jenny knows about. I'm probably not going to tell all of you about right away. But the point is that I recognize that the confusion and the lack of knowing when to jump and feeling like you're overwhelmed and feeling like you don't understand what to do next. It's life, not diabetes, right? And maybe it feels a little more dire in some situations than others. You know what I mean? Like standing in the store, trying to decide between 2 waxes for your car might not be as crazy as I wonder if I want to add 3 more basal units to my kid or something like that. But the truth is that inaction, that's what keeps you where you're at. So if you're somewhere you don't want to be, do something. You know?
And an easier one to honestly do, let's say you are running high, all day long, and you're higher after meals, but you're still just stuck high. In that scenario, a safer thing is just add a little bit more basal.
Yeah.
Add just a little bit more basal, right? If instead in time periods where you're not actually eating, it doesn't look too bad. And then you've got these big excursions after you eat just about, anything, even a microscopic 8 grams of carb maybe, and it goes rocketing up. Well, then you may be okay with basal, and maybe the next place to add more. And again, not 3 units more, but maybe add a half a unit or adjust your insulin to carb ratio by 1 gram to get a little bit more insulin around the times that you see the change that you don't want to see happening.
Yeah. Arden's been getting up in the morning going to school, and her blood sugar has been rising this school year, like 30 points in the morning. And I tried to let the algorithm mess with it. Didn't work. I tried making just some simple basal adjustments. Wasn't enough. And then finally, I just said to her, I was like, when you leave the house from now on, will you just bolus 3 units, please? And she's like, what? And I was like, just throw in 3 units, get in the car, go to school. I was like, because whatever's happening is happening enough. I believe it's happening. I trust that what I know is going to happen is going to happen. And she's using an algorithm. So if you make an uncovered bolus, it removes her basal immediately. So her basal is like 1.2 in the morning. So I figured it was about 1.5 units or so to fix the number or to get ahead of the number. And we got to cover the basal that's gone. So I was like, just 3. And then we adjusted off of that. Ended up being a little too much. The next day we did a little less. The next day we had a better outcome. The next day she forgot to do it, on the 3rd day. And I was like, see, it happened again. Like, do this thing. That made her trust to try to do it. And it becomes a little more important to her. I just think it's another example of do something. I've been saying online a lot to people lately, and you'll forgive me because I can't pronounce it in its origin language in Latin. But I've been telling people lately, fortune favors the bold. Just try something. You know what I mean? Stand up, thump your chest, and go, I'm going to take a swing here. Let's see what happens. And then you get back to the stuff you hear in the earlier pro tips, It's all
well,
there.
And I think the bigger thing too that you're bringing in is try something, right? But then analyze what that trying did, right? Don't just try it and be like, well, that clearly didn't work. Like, still focus on it. Well, it didn't work. Your adjustment either left you too high or happened for you. It caused it to be a little bit too low, and the algorithm couldn't really save you from that extra insulin. Well, but now so you use that for that information and you move forward and you say, okay, tomorrow we're going to do it this way. I mean, that goes into, a lot of things in terms of kind of the exiting of the honeymoon. It does. It's try this. It looks like consistently in the past week, he's needed more insulin. Right. Okay, great. You're trying to add more insulin. Is it enough? Is it getting to you to the place that you want to be? Insulin needs may actually continue to climb a little bit. It's not like a night and day, like yesterday we needed 1 unit and tomorrow we're going to need 10 units. That's not typically the exit of honeymoon. But over time, that lack of beta cells that was helping you is going to show up very evidently in that you don't return to that minimal amount of insulin.
Well, do you know what made me do this episode when Isabel told me that she thought it was necessary? It was that I had to get over that thing in my head that it's already in the podcast. Like, I was like, no, it's in there already. You just have to listen to it. And then I thought, well, it's in there, but it's in a different way, because what we just talked about that, it really is the way when I was talking about, God, I don't even know what episode it was now. I guess maybe that's a good point. It's hard to find them all, but but when I was talking about, like, sometimes, people's meal ratio, sometimes their insulin to carb ratio can be like spot on for a number of meals, but not work for a certain meal. And I always use that silly example. If you have meatloaf and mashed potatoes and green beans, and you count the carbs, and it says, the carbs say, oh, this is 5 units. You make your pre-bolus, you spike, you end up correcting later with 2 units, which brings you down, and you don't get low. Well, the next time you have the meatloaf and the mashed potatoes or whatever,
you need 7 units.
You use 7 units, right? Like, you see it happen, and then you take the leap. You stop looking back at the meal ratio and going, no, that's not right. I counted the carbs. It's right. This is 5 units. Very similarly to the idea of you're using a pen that only goes up to a half of unit, and you keep using it and then watching a low blood sugar happen and go, I'm powerless. Well, you're not powerless. Like, you just need to go get a syringe and do it a different way. And you're not at the mercy of your carb ratio just because it works 5 days a week, but not on Sunday when you have meatloaf. Like, right. So it's all kind of the same idea. Like, I know it sounds trite, but it's all
well. And that's, I think it brings in a good piece too, in terms of, multiple daily injections. And then we move to pumping, and then we move to the fancy features of pumping. And then you might move to an algorithm driven pump, right? All of these things take like evaluation. Yeah. And, a good example from somebody I worked with a while ago who had started using one of the algorithm driven pumps. And she's like, this is fantastic. I love it. It's working so awesome, but it doesn't work on Friday night. And I was like, okay, well, what were you doing on Friday night that this doesn't work anymore for you? And she had this like whole thing figured out for her dinner Friday nights that she would go out to with her husband. And on a conventional pump, she could use like, a temporary basal, she could use an extended bolus, and she had it down pat. And I was like, just go to manual mode in your pump and use it that way overnight. And Saturday morning, turn your algorithm back on. She's like, why didn't I think of that? I was like, oh, I don't know either, but I hope that it helps. And it seemed to be much better then, right?
So last night.
Yeah.
Because we went to a bar and Arden got nachos with cheesesteak on top of it and had French fries. And I crushed the first bolus. I was like, I haven't been this excited about a bolus in a while. I was on top of it. And then I started seeing the fat rise, and we hit it again. And I won, like I was over. And then I go upstairs to start working, and suddenly she jumps up. Her blood sugar jumps up. And I go downstairs. I'm like, what happened? I was like, what happened? I had some gummy bears, she told me. And I was like, no. We can't put simple sugar on top of fat and protein. I was like, are you all out of your minds? Yes, like, not without like significant. I said, Arden, if you were going to eat gummy bears in this situation, the pre-bolus would have needed to be causing a fall before you put the bears in. You know what I mean? I was like, and then that would have been okay. But she just did the like, my blood sugar is great thing, threw in some insulin, waited a little while and ate it. And it was not nearly enough. We needed to be more drastic with it. And so I was like, so my text said this, I'll bleep it out. It said, then it said, open the loop, bolus 4 units.
and let the basal run.
Let's go back to normal pumping for a minute and stop asking this algorithm to do something that it doesn't know how to do,
because it's not a learning algorithm. Unfortunately, it doesn't, it doesn't react the way that we have the experience to say, I know this is what's going to happen. Please don't fiddle with the insulin that I put in purposely. Right?
Now's not the time to take the basal away, algorithm. Please. Right. I got gummy bears and cheesesteak nachos happening right now. Anyway, Jenny, there was, in the past, there was a moment when I used to worry, and I'd think like, well, we've already said these things and people will find it. And now I realize that that's not how this is going to work, that these continuing conversations are incredibly important. I think maybe the conversational part of this episode and many episodes is more important even than the technical aspects of what was said inside of it. Right. Like if you listen to the Pro Tip series and you had your brain or my brain, or your experience and my experience, you could derive from the pro tip series how to manage a honeymoon. But for people who are in that situation, I think they need the information here. You know what I mean?
In one spot.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if I was just like super hopeful or lazy. I'm not sure. But I used to think like, just go listen to the pro tip episodes. It explains the whole thing, and it really does. So I appreciate this. I think we're going to have to, like I said, I want to do one for, female hormones, menstruation, that kind of thing specific the next time we record. And then from there, I'm going to say this here, Jenny, because it'll put us both on the hook. In 2022, Jenny and I are going to go back to certain pro tip episodes. We're going to re-listen to them on our time and then incorporate questions that I'm collecting on Facebook on how to supercharge those episodes. So they're going to
that's great.
We're going to get a part 2 kind of a situation. That's how you and I will spend our time seeing each other through the winter of 2022.
Sequels to certain episodes.
I'm thinking of them as director's cuts for
there you go.
For older people who you remember the director's commentaries?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you mean? You flip the movie on and the audio goes away and you just hear the guy go, in this shot, what I was thinking was that if the sun came in from the left.
Right. And we could pan over here and listen to this music from this producer, whatever.
Do you see how Miss Selma Hayek's eyes are glistening? I did that. I told the DP. Like, I don't know if you ever listened to them. They're pompous exchanges. Jenny and I will not do that. But we're going to go back and listen to what we've said. Because I've done it a couple of times. Like in episode 500, I went back to episode 11 that's bold with insulin, and I listened to it and like talked over top of it. Like, so people listening in episode, I think it's 100. Oh my God, 100, not 500. Okay. Sorry. In episode 100, I just basically did a director's cut of that because I realized that when I said it, I was just saying it. Like and now I've lived all this time since then and had these interactions with people that maybe there'd be more to add to that. And I think that exists for the Pro Tip series. And I'm excited. I'm sorry that you're going to start getting emails from me that say, please listen to this one before we talk again. But
no, that's fine.
No, it's not.
Not a
You're
problem.
A busy person.
I like it.
You're a busy person.
Well, and I can do it during my workouts. That's not usually, that's my mental, my moving, mental sort of strategizing time is my exercise time. I am not a sit in one space and meditate. I'm a moving meditator, but I can meditate on the episodes so we can make them better for everybody else.
Excellent. Well, I have a question. Then I'll let you go. How do you make out listening to your own voice? Does it freak you out?
I don't know. I guess it's kind of weird to me because I hear myself speak, in your brain, but when you hear yourself, it sounds different. I guess I don't mind listening to myself, but I don't know. I don't think that I sound like what I sound like when I listen.
No. I sound so me. Right now we're recording. I can hear you and me in my headphones. I sound different in my headphones than I sound on the recording. And if I'm just speaking out into the world, I don't think I sound like the person on the podcast at all, but people think I do. But in my ear, it doesn't sound the same. Although, and do you ever say anything and hear yourself and go, oh, Jenny, you should not have said it. You should have said it like this. Do you ever correct yourself?
I do. Yeah. Absolutely. And a lot of the ones that I've listened to, I'm like, oh, this would have been a better explanation. Or I could have put this in as an example and that would have been better. So maybe I think it's great to sort of rethink them because then we can add extra.
I agree that there's just always going to be other stuff to say. And as we move forward into 2022 and beyond, more people are going to be using algorithms and there's going to be a whole new layer of understanding for diabetes. There's going to be things that you and I haven't experienced yet that through these experiences over and over again of using this technology are going to come out. I don't see an end to this podcast. I used to think it was finite, and now I think somebody's going to need to, make up a cure for this podcast not to be necessary. So,
well, that's what I was going to say. I don't think until there's honestly a true, you don't have to use any technology or anything. You just go in and get your blood work done and make sure your doctor's like, yep, you still look great. It's all perfect. Yeah. Right. I don't think, the information that people need, especially with life-changing and everything, I think it's purposeful.
I do too. I appreciate you doing this with
Cool.
me. It's sort of the end of
Yes.
the year, so let me thank you for giving your
Yes.
time so greatly to the podcast. I want to thank Ascensia Diabetes for sponsoring the Remastered Diabetes Pro Tip series. Don't forget, you can get a free Contour Next Gen Starter Kit at contournext.com/juicebox free meter. While supplies last, U.S. residents only. If you're enjoying the remastered episodes of the Diabetes Pro Tip series from the Juicebox Podcast, you have Touched by Type 1 to thank. Touchedbytype1.org is a proud sponsor of the remastering of the Diabetes Pro Tip series. Learn more about them at touchedbytype1.org. A huge thank you to one of today's sponsors, Gvoke Glucagon. Find out more about Gvoke HypoPen at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. You spell that GVOKEGLUCAGON.com/juicebox. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Now, listen, there's 26 episodes in this series. You might not know what each of them are. I'm going to tell you now. Episode 1000 is called Newly Diagnosed or Starting Over. Episode 1001, all about MDI. 1002, all about insulin. 1003 is called Pre-Bolus. Episode 1004, Temp Basal. 1005, Insulin Pumping. 1006, Mastering a CGM. 1007, Bump and Nudge. 1008, The Perfect Bolus. 1009, Variables. 1010, Setting Basal Insulin. 1011, Exercise. 1012, Fat and Protein. 1013, Insulin Injury and Surgery. 1014, Glucagon and Low BGs. In episode 1015, Jenny and I talk about emergency room protocols. In 1016, long-term health. 1017, Bump and Nudge Part 2. In episode 1018, pregnancy. 1019, explaining type 1. 1020, glycemic index and load. 1021, postpartum. 1022, weight loss. 1023, honeymoon. 1024, female hormones. And in episode 1025, we talk about transitioning from MDI to pumping. Before I go, I'd like to share 2 reviews with you of the Diabetes Pro Tip series, one from an adult and one from a caregiver. I learned so much from the Pro Tip series when our son was diagnosed last summer. It really helped get me through those first few very tough weeks. It wasn't just your explanations of how it all works, which were way better than anything our diabetes educator told us, but something about the way you and Jenny presented everything, even the scary stuff, that reassured me that we could figure out how to deal with this and to teach our son how to deal with it too. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. This podcast is a game changer. 25 years as a type 1 diabetic, and only now am I learning some of the basics. Scott brings useful information and presents it in digestible ways. Learning that pre-bolus doesn't just mean bolus before you eat, but means timing your insulin so that it is active as the carbs become active, took me already from a decent 6.5 A1C down to a 5.6 in the past 8 months. I've never met Scott, but after listening to hundreds of episodes and joining him in his Facebook group, I consider him a friend. Listening to this podcast and applying it has been the best thing I have done for my health since diagnosis. I genuinely hope that the Diabetes Pro Tip series is valuable for you and your family. If it is, find me in the private Facebook group and say hello. If you're enjoying the Juicebox Podcast, please share it with a friend, a neighbor, your physician, or someone else who you know that might also benefit from the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Jenny Smith holds a bachelor's degree in human nutrition and biology from the University of Wisconsin. She is a registered and licensed dietitian, a certified diabetes educator, and a certified trainer on most makes and models of insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitoring systems. She's also had type 1 diabetes for over 35 years, and she works at integrateddiabetes.com. If you're interested in hiring Jenny, you can learn more about her at that link. If you're living with diabetes or are the caregiver of someone who is, and you're looking for an online community of supportive people who understand, check out the Juicebox Podcast private Facebook group, Juicebox Podcast Type 1 Diabetes. There are over 41,000 active members, and we add 300 new members every week. There is a conversation happening right now that would interest you, inform you, or give you the opportunity to share something that you've learned. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes on Facebook. And it's not just for type 1s. Any kind of diabetes, any way you're connected to it, you are invited to join this absolutely free and welcoming community.